and gentlemen of the media and other visiting friends. Today, Chief Justice Brian Sykes, in giving judgment in relation to a suit brought by the People's National Party, struck down the NIDS legislation in its entirety. I want to begin by quoting a statement made by Chief Justice Brian Sykes at the beginning of his judgment, where he quoted Dias Dexter, QC, from an article entitled Silence of the Laws, Dissent and Democracy in Cases That Changed Our Lives. And I quote, "Dissent has a troubled history. The word dissident has often been a pejorative term. Dissenters have rarely been welcomed and are frequently viewed with suspicion, not only by the dominant power, but also by majoritarian opinion. And yet, in a democracy, dissent is essential. It is indispensable to our freedom. In fact, it is one of the authentic voices of our freedom, particularly in times of exception, in wars, declared and undeclared, when the freedom of the citizen is at stake, and particularly when the state itself seeks to curtail fundamental freedoms in the name of national security or economic development or whatever other perceived end worth pursuing." End quote. The People's National Party feels vindicated by today's ruling of the Constitutional Court, headed by Chief Justice Honorable Brian Sykes, and including their lordships Justice David Batts and Justice Lisa Palmer Hamilton. The court validated the position of the People's National Party that provisions of the National Identification and Registration Act infringe the rights of the Jamaican people, including the right to privacy and access to public services, and deemed the act, the NIDS Act, to be unconstitutional. We will be studying the judgment carefully in its entirety to guide us in considering any future legislation as we seek to secure a national identification system. I want to make it very plain that the People's National Party has always supported and continues to support the need for a national identification system, especially in the context of advanced digital technologies. But such a system cannot be at the expense of the democratic rights of the Jamaican people. A critical aspect of the judgment that needs to be emphasized is that we as a country are ruled by laws, and our Constitution is the supreme law of the country. Good governance requires that government respects the law and the Constitution. You cannot require citizens, no government can require citizens to respect the law while themselves breaking the law or disrespecting the law. This is also a point, I might add, that we have raised in relation to the states of emergency, but now is not the time for that discussion. We made every attempt as an opposition in the House to get the government to stop and think again. We urged them to appoint a joint select committee to consider the legislation. In the end, they resisted every such effort. We told them that legislation of such significance as this required that citizens be given an opportunity to appear before the legislature, to express their views, that specialist associations like the Bar Association, human rights groups, and others needed to be consulted directly on legislation like this. In the end, what we were given was bad legislation rushed through the House, and the end result has been a waste of taxpayers' money and a waste of parliamentary time. In fact, when the legislation was brought to the Senate, there were 184 amendments to the legislation, I believe, moved in the Senate. If you want an example of bad legislation, simply look at the number of amendments that were moved in this ad hoc fashion. We would hope that such an approach to the passage of legislation will never be repeated again. I want to point out that many millions of dollars have been spent on NIDS, that even when the legislation was before the courts, the government persisted on spending massively on a public relations campaign, which I might add was contrary to the very spirit of our traditions, that matters before the court ought not to be the subject of public discourse until the matters have been settled by the court. I think what we are having to face overall, that there is an attitude towards governance on the part of the current Jamaica Labour Party government which is misplaced, which is bad, which is wrong. It is showing disrespect to the rights of citizens. It is showing disrespect to the legislature, and it is showing disrespect to the normal norms of governmental conduct which have guided successive governments drawn from both sides of the parliament over many, many decades. I believe that the finding of the Chief Justice and the Constitutional Court today vindicates our approach as an opposition and provides a signpost to the government about how it should approach legislation for the future. Thank you very much.
I must start by commending the legal team who worked so assiduously in putting this matter together. Even while I apologize for the absence of our lead counsel, Mike Hilton, Queen's Counsel, who is presently attending the Commonwealth Law Conference in Zambia. It's almost an overwhelming occasion. We look at this judgment as a victory for democracy. This piece of legislation was the most significant piece of legislation that was enacted in recent times. It not only impacted every single Jamaican, persons who live here for 6 months, but it affected all the citizens who live in the diaspora. So the consequences were serious. We feel validated that the court has shared our concerns. The court has reflected exactly what we have been saying from the outset and has found that this legislation breaches our constitutional rights. What makes me happy today? There are a number of things. One, there were so many persons who had a real interest in the outcome of this case. And I think that once we begin to engage our citizens in their constitutional rights and educate them about it, it can only redound to the benefit of Jamaica in totality. I am happy that our judges have demonstrated their boldness and their courage and their independence from the government. And I am proud that the decision was taken to live stream the decision and that the Chief Justice explained it in language that every single Jamaican could understand. And I can assure you that the response to the outcome has been overwhelming. As a loyal opposition, we are not exultant in the way that things have turned out. We remind the government at this stage that we implore them over and over again to just simply listen to us, as we were acting without malice. We were not acting in a partisan way. We were acting as Jamaicans concerned about the consequences of breaching the constitutional rights of Jamaicans. I have to remind you that it is probably the first time, and Dr. Phillips can correct me if I'm wrong, but we sat in the Senate until 1:20 a.m. Saturday morning. And the reason why we did that was because we could not convince the government that they needed to pause and contemplate what they were doing. And so we had to do the best we could to make a bad job better. Indeed, it was very surprising that the government relied on the very matters that we had fixed, the concerns which we had addressed, to say that it wasn't that bad after all. There is no halfway house when you come to people's rights. And I caution everyone, if you allow those rights to be eroded under the guise of fighting criminality and under the guise of needing to move to a different economy and making money for the country, you are going to find yourself sliding down a slippery slope where before you know it, your government forgets that we voted for them, and you are staring at a dictatorship and wondering how you got there. I remind the country of this. Because we came under attack, we are backward. We don't like technology. We are bad-minded. And this judgment has vindicated those remarks and has shown that we are simply doing our duty as the opposition. We are the last bastion. We are here to protect the people from the excesses of a bad government.